Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the latest in the webinar series from Snowflake, NUITEQ Snowflake. Tonight, Danielle Macklin will be talking about creating assignments. As always, any questions, please feel free to put the questions in the questions box, and I will moderate as we go along. My name is Jack Reed. I'm Vice President of Customer Experience. If you have any questions for me, feel free to email me at jr@nuitec.com. Danielle, welcome and thank you.
Hi. Hello again, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So today I'm going to share with you some of the ways that you can create assessments for your students using Snowflake web, as well as we'll even talk a little bit about the poll feature as a way to informally assess students. So I'm going to share with you my screen. So of our 16 Snowflake templates, we have created under My Lessons, we have the ability to filter by assessment type. When I say assessment, that means all of these lesson activities have definitive correct or incorrect answers. And these are activities that you can send to your students to complete as part of remote learning on their own device and be able to receive a graded or scoreable sheet back on how they performed on those different lesson activities. So we have arrange, bugs, drop, Einstein, tags, quiz, match, and groups. The really great thing too with many of our lesson activity templates is there's a lot of compatibility between lesson activity types. So for example, if I create a lesson activity using bugs, and I'll do that to show you, I can take this very same lesson activity, create a copy of it, and then play it in a different template. So for our bugs, we'll just do this as, do a quick little math. So for this particular assessment, I'll have my opportunity to create the question. So I'm going to go with just simple addition, and then my answer. So it already provides me with the one space. I can either, since I'm working on my MacBook at home, I usually just hit the return key or the enter key, and it'll provide me the create answer option. Or I can select create answer from the top and then drag that to the bottom. And it will say that those are my answers. And we can see in our previous screen of the bugs, we have these cute little creepy crawly green bugs. I can also customize that and turn those bugs into butterflies or into ladybugs. Or I could hide the bug itself and have the answer on a card on the bug's back. Now for this one, we can see the text is a little small, so I'm going to just make that quite a bit larger, so we can see now that text on our bugs. So if this were a lesson activity that I were using with my students and I wanted to create obviously more questions than just the one, bugs also has the opportunity to create multiple correct answers. So I could have an example of that would be select the even numbers. So there's my assortment of bugs. And now I can select all of the ones that would be the correct answer. So then my students would select those bugs. And if they were correct, we'd see that space. Go. If they have the bug incorrect, they get a little X. And then you'll be able to see the correct answers and incorrect answers for each round when they finish. So if I were to send this lesson activity to my students in our Snowflake class, I also could change some of the gameplay rules. So I could set it to randomize. When it's set to randomize, that means all of the questions will be in different orders. And then students, when they play the lesson activity, if they're playing it just as practice, where they can do it multiple times, every time they play, it'll be in a different order. Or if you're doing it as a formative assessment at the end of maybe a math lesson, or as a way to do a quick quiz, randomize is also going to make it so that each question is going to be different. And now I had mentioned before that this is one of the lessons that has compatibility with other lesson types. So with the same lesson activity, I can take all of this information and change the lesson type to So I was at bugs. This lesson will directly correspond with the Einstein lesson. So by selecting Einstein, I have the same information in all my data, my create questions and answers, same format, creating questions and answers. I have the ability to select my multiple correct answers. So it won't do this on its own. It doesn't default to this. You have to go back and double check. 5 is 7, there we go. But for this lesson activity, I could set it up to be multiple players. So if I were doing this in my classroom and I had this set up on my interactive panel, I could have different groups of students participating. I can add time rounds for the lesson activity. And again, I can randomize the lesson questions themselves. We're going to just do this as one player. It's a little easier to see this way. So for this particular lesson activity, my students would have to select the numbers, pull them into their box. If they're incorrect, a point is taken away. If they are correct, a point is added. So since there was only one correct answer for that, they're only going to pull in that one card. And then the time, is we can see, ticking away over here. So with this, I didn't have to create any new data, any new information. All of it was saved from my bugs lesson activity. I could then take this very same lesson activity and change the lesson type to a quiz. So again, this is one of our assessment lesson types. So I just started with bugs. I turned that bug into the Einstein. And then now let's say I want to take the same activity, but I only want one correct answer. And quiz would be your traditional multiple choice type question. So we can see all of our answers. Now, obviously, there's going to be some editing I would need to do since I had designed this question to have multiple correct answers. I'm going to want to take out the other answers for that. And then now I can select what my correct answer would be. There we go. And I can move the question order around. It will default. So as I create a question, so I'll show you another example. It's going to automatically default to be the first correct answer. So the first space is going to, by default, be selected as correct. So I can keep that, or I do have the ability to change that if needed. So, and again, I can customize all of these settings here. I really love that there's that compatibility in so many of our lesson activity types because it makes jobs for teachers a lot easier. You can take all of the same information and create multiple lesson activities, so it's a really great time saver. So then with this lesson activity type, one way that I could use this in my classroom or as we're doing distance learning and students are working at home on their own devices, I can then send this lesson activity to my students. And with all of the assessments, you have the opportunity to select it as gradable. So you can send it as practice. So even though the lesson activity type is an assessment, you can send it where students would just practice. They would see the correct answers and incorrect answers, but there would be no data, no score attached to it. By selecting gradable assessments and then selecting the students you want to send to. So this is great if you're doing differentiation and you only want to send to select students, adding a due date. Now, when that student receives the assignment, I will then receive a score back on that particular assignment. And all of that can be done through creating my classes through the Manage Students part, and then Review Progress will allow me to see how my students performed on that lesson activity. Now, this one I obviously just sent my student, which is me, hasn't had the time to create or to complete the lesson activity, but I can show you one where students have completed that. So we have this particular lesson activity has been completed. You can see all of the ones that had been sent. I can see the student that I sent it to, that they opened it, what their score was, the amount of time it took them to complete. And then I have the opportunity, now I've already filled that in, but I have the opportunity to provide individualized feedback for the student. And that message would then be sent to the student with this particular lesson. The student will receive all of the same info. They'll also be able to see the questions that they answered correctly and incorrectly with the checks and the X's. So the same screen that I see here, my students would see when they had finished the lesson activity as well. So it gives them an opportunity to go back and see if there were questions that were maybe more troubling to them. And for me as a teacher, I have that ability to have the data so I can go back and reevaluate what do I need to include more of in my next instruction, or what did they struggle with? What are they all acing? And I can move on from that concept. And then all of this data I can then export as a CSV file. I'm not sure if you can see it downloading right here, but I have my CSV file, so then I can see each individual question with the students, as well as the raw score and the time as well. So that's how I can send some of those lesson activities. I'm going to go back and demo some more. Again, if at any point you have questions and you want to relay those over to Jack, he will jump in and send them my way. So we just checked out Bugs, Einstein, and Quiz, 3 of our lesson activity templates that are all compatible with one another. In this particular set, another group of lesson activities that are compatible are the drop lesson and the match lesson. So we'll look at drop. Again, this can also be sent to your students as a gradable assessment. So we'll do an ELA one. So for create round, this would be my overall question. And then now I can have my 2 paired that would be together. So noun, verb, run. And I'll make this font a little larger to see. We'll do one more. So, I can also change my tile shape. And we can see this font's a little too big. My words are not filling too much of the square. There we go. And then I can also play this lesson activity in simplified mode. Simplified mode makes it so that the ring where it had been spinning, it's now going to be stationary. So it's not going to be moving. It's a little easier for students who might get confused or struggle with having that added mobility, or not mobility, that added movement on the screen might be a distraction for them. So that's one feature that you can change. And then as students play this lesson activity, they would simply drag and drop the tile into the ring. It's correct, it shows this check. Incorrect, you get the X. There we go. And then this same lesson activity, I could also change, had been a drop, I can now make that lesson activity a match. So I haven't had the need to change any of my data here. It's all loaded in, and I would simply drag and drop. A little larger. Now on this, I would probably change the color so we could see the backgrounds a little bit. I have all of these customizations. All of our lesson activity templates have this feature of being able to customize the font, the size, the color, adding a shadow. Shadow gives it like that little bit of a bold feel. We also have all of the background themes that you can customize. Some of the themes have fun animations in the beginning. My internet's running a little slow today, but this would be one of the live animations. So this has just a very quick couple second movement before it goes into the activity itself. I could also change my rules, randomized and ordered. Add in a timer, so if I wanted my students to spend only a certain period of time completing this lesson activity, maybe I were using this as part of a station rotation in my classroom, or I wanted to make sure they weren't spending too much time, or that they weren't maybe looking up the answers if they were working remotely at home, I can limit the amount of time that they have with that. So those are all features that are unique, or excuse me, that are the same for all of the lesson activity templates. You also have the ability to add in, for all of these tiles, I can change the background. So I can pull a background up from my computer. I can do an image search. And when I do an image search, it's like a Google search. It's going to pull up just lots of various JPEGs, and it's sticking with the text that I had typed in. So if I wanted to change this to something else, I could obviously change it. And I could select my JPEG and I can replace the text. And we have some features as far as being able to change the size a little bit. So if I did fill, it's going to make it a little bit bigger. So the size of that would not be good. You can also create, I do a lot of my own creating backgrounds. And when I do my background, wrong one again. When I do my background creation, I just make sure that whatever size I'm doing, if I'm doing it in a Google drawing, the size is going to be just a perfect square. So if I'm doing it in inches, it might be 10 by 10 inches. If I'm working in pixels, I usually work in pixels. It'll be, I usually go with like 250 by 250. And then that way I know whatever I've created is going to fill that square perfectly. I can also add in sound. So if I have an MP4 sound I wanted to include, I can add that. I can also record sound. So I can record up to 15 seconds of audio. And then that audio would play after my students had moved that particular tile. So I think this was for my noun. I could record. A noun is a person, place, or thing. And then when my students move that tile, a noun is a person, place, or thing. They'll have the audio that adds in that extra support as well. I did hear a couple questions come in. I'm just going to take a quick look. Oh, I think Jack is sending out
Their polls.
Okay, great.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I heard the dinging and I just wanted to double check. So I again showed the 3 here, Bugs, Quiz, Einstein that all match, and then Drop and the Match lesson activity that also are compatible lesson activity types. The other lesson activity types we have are Arrange, where you would put the items in order. This is really great for teaching sequencing skills or having students maybe timeline an event. And then Groups is a way to categorize. So if I did parts of speech, maybe instead I want it to be find all the nouns. And we can see all of that lesson information. Some of it had still been there, but since this isn't as a compatible lesson, it's not going to match up the correct way. House. Cheeseburger. I can create another group. And for this lesson activity, my students would drag and drop. And right now it is set to ordered, and you can see all of the ones at the top are going to match the verbs. But if I change my gameplay rules to randomized, then everything's going to be shuffled around a little bit. So cheeseburger. And we can see how the students would be assessed on that. And then we'll look at just the last one. So change lesson activity type. So lastly, we'll talk a little bit about tags. So tags is really great, and you're able to take this whole image here. Now all my information is still there from the last one. I obviously haven't created a brand new. I'm just trying to make sure I'm not taking up too much of your time, and I'm going to change those in just a second. I really like this lesson activity, and I think that this can be used in the class in so many different ways because you can take, and I'm going to just pull up one that I've already grabbed from my computer. I took a screenshot of a math worksheet. So if I'm thinking of for teachers as you're doing like your math workbooks, and you just take, if they're not digital, take a picture of it and save it as a JPEG, and then now you can upload that particular image into the tags lesson activity. So this one is a graphing one. Obviously these don't make sense because there's no cats on this graph or house or cheeseburgers. But I would then do, since it's graphing ordered pairs, I'll just do a couple. So 0 and 8. If you're doing this from your teacher book, you would probably have all the answers too and not have to look at everything. I don't think I'm writing that correctly. I think I need to, there we go, wrong one. And then my students would take the little tags, the pins that I've dropped. I'm going to change that color since this is mostly white. I'm going to make that a little darker. They would take that pin and we want to place it on the correct spot. Oh, I didn't look at the numbers closely. Not the right numbers, but you get the idea. And 0, 9. So if I had this for all of the particular graph itself, I could then have my students complete the answers, and then they would be responsible for moving these pins, these tags, over to the correct spot. And again, you'll see if it's correct or incorrect. And all of this can be sent to your students to complete on their Snow.Live classes. So I'm going to go back to my lesson activity types. So those were our 8 lesson activity assessment templates. Another way that you could do kind of mini assessments, very informally, would be creating a poll. So this would be great if you're doing, as you're doing your distance learning, if you have your students on maybe, a Google Meet or a Zoom or whatever platform you're using to do those class meetings, you can create a poll, which actually I'm going to go back and take one that I've already built just to show you what it looks like. And it would just be a quick way to check for understanding. And students can complete these on any device. So I'll go back to my polls. So on your screen, you could then share the poll results. Students can be answering just with a separate tab open on their computer, or they could even use, if they're working on their cell phones, since we know many students that their data on their phone plan is their internet access. So that would be one feature for that. So let's pick this test poll. And as I'm creating my poll, I would title it. I can add background. So you can see here, I have my little foxes as the background. I can customize my font. And then I have different question types that I can add in. So we have multiple choice questions. We have yes, no questions, which multiple choice, you can have several answers to select from. Yes, no, it's almost like a true false. There would only be 2 options. Text, so students would send in short answer text response. Image would be allowing students to take a image from their phone or from their computer, anything that's saved, as well as using their camera. So if they have a webcam built in, or if they're using their camera on their phone, they can send in those images. They could also do a text with an image. And then one of our newest ones is the draw feature, which I really like. I'm just going to title this Draw a Flower. My students can draw over a particular background. So if I were doing, this would be really great if I were doing a math problem and I wanted my students to maybe circle certain parts of the problem, or like doing a number line and I wanted them to identify where -4 was. I could send that image, students would be able to annotate over that image and then share it back onto our screen here. Again, I could just do an online image search. So I could search for just a garden. Oh, it's interesting that I'm not getting gardens. I'm getting, okay, well, you get the idea. So students can then have that annotation over there or over the particular image that I send. And I'm going to move that one up just so I can demo what that would look like. Put that at the top. And then once I send this poll to my students would join through a QR code. So if I just did a quick little QR code, I'm going to open up my camera, add joining in. Oh, and I see some of us are joining too. That's awesome. And then see if my internet's going to work. I'll give it just a second more if anyone else wants to join in. So as I'm doing this just on my device, I can see kind of what's happening on screen. As a teacher, you can choose to keep this part hidden from your students, and that way you can wait until all of the answers have been submitted. And then I'll go ahead and hit next. So our first question is saying draw a flower, and I get to decide the wait time. So if I wanted students to think about it, if nothing can be done, they can't do anything on their own device until I select begin. And once I select begin, my students on their device are given a little kind of mini whiteboard. Oops, there we go, mini whiteboard. And they have an assortment of colors to choose from. So I'll just draw my little flower. And if I'm happy, I can submit. And we can see our answers as they've come in. And then now as a teacher, as I'm doing this remotely with my kiddos, I could then share this screen and share all of the answers that have come in. So we can see all of our beautiful flowers. The other question we have is, this was the short answer, the text response. So students, as they complete it on their own, they would type in their own text. They can also send emojis. My sixth graders loved incorporating as many emojis as possible. So we can see our answers as they're coming in. We've got the nice little timer counting down. I had set this for a 20-second time limit. Let me turn the volume down on my computer. I'm not sure if that's going to be playing on your end as well. So now I have my results. My next question, what is the sum of 4 plus 4? This would be our multiple choice, so we can select from one of these three answers. I'm going to intentionally answer incorrectly. And then as a teacher, you can see what the correct answer is. Students are going to see on their screen what their answer was and what their answer should have been. So then they can check their answers as well. The next one is the ability to send an image. So this would be if I'm working on my phone, I can browse pictures on my phone, or I can use my camera, take my selfie. I have the ability to rotate, so that came out crooked, so I can rotate that, I can crop, and then I can send it in. And now I have my selfie sent. And we can see our answers as they come in. And then the last one in this feature is our ability to send a picture with text. So I'm going to just browse from my photo library. And again, students, if they were doing this on their own devices, they have the ability to send that. And they have at the bottom, oops, gotta rotate that so it's not upside down. At the bottom, they have the ability to add text to it, and then that answer has come through. So just more ways that you can do kind of quick assessments with your students. So not as stringent as sending those lesson activities. Oh, pretty yard. So this is just another really great tool. So as you're doing kind of those remote learning activities with your kids, this is a really great feature as far as being able to do quick check for understanding. As you're working on this with your kids, now I have the question still visible on my screen, but I can hide that question menu so that I get a little bit of a larger screen. I also can make sure that if a kid accidentally gets kicked out, I can have that QR code back on. See our results. If I go back to show question menu, if at any point as I'm working, I realize, oh, I want to add another question, I can just quickly add an additional question on the fly and then have that question be part of our lesson activity as well. And then when I'm happy with everything that we've done, I can end the poll. My students will be kicked out automatically, but I can export that data as a CSV file. So then I can see all of the questions that had been answered and what the responses had been. So those are a couple ways that we have to assess your students, creating assessments through lesson activities, as well as using the polls feature. So I know I've talked a lot. If there are any questions, I'd like to give you an opportunity to ask those now. If you haven't already completed the poll Jack sent you, please make sure that you have a moment to do that. And I'll just hang and wait for a minute.
Danielle, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry, my computer's acting up.
That's all right.
So there are no questions as of yet. I do want to thank those that have answered the poll. There's a couple people that have not answered yet, so if you could go ahead and do so, that would be wonderful. And this is actually topics that we're thinking of producing for you, so we would like your input as if you like them or not. And then I would also like to remind you that you could email us at any time with any other questions or ideas that you have. Again, it's jr@nuitec.com. And I think that's it for the evening. There don't seem to be any questions. Danielle, do you have anything before we close?
No, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.